Hello everybody, my name is Grant Lilly and thank you for joining me today for my Anatomy 100 You're the Expert presentation. Today we're going to be discussing how urine is formed, formation, and elimination from the body. We will primarily be looking at the major organs involved in the urinary system, as well as their structures, the functionality that they have, and how they all fit together, as well as what can go wrong within the urinary system. The urinary system is made up of several organs, including the kidneys, ureters, bladder, and urethra. The main purpose of the system is to eliminate waste from the body, along with regulating the blood volume, blood pressure, controlling the body's levels of electrolytes and metabolites, as well as regulating blood pH. Now, these electrolytes are crucial for the body as they are involved in many crucial metabolic processes. Furthermore, maintaining blood pH ensures that a person's blood does not get too acidic or basic, and the typical blood pH in a normal body is between about 7.35 to 7.45. The body has a pair of two kidneys. These kidneys are located in the posterior of the abdominal cavity and tend to weigh within the range of about 115 grams to 170 grams between men and women, with male kidneys typically being on the heavier end of the spectrum. Kidneys are surrounded by renal capsules and layers of fat. This offers support and protection, and within the kidneys are structures of the renal cortex and the inner renal medulla. Now, the structural unit of a kidney is the nephron, but we will be discussing this later in detail. The primary function of the kidneys is to receive blood from the renal arteries and diffuse blood out of the renal veins. The structure of the nephron goes through the process of actually filtering this blood and producing urine. These functions are called ultrafiltration, selective reabsorption, osmoregulation. Furthermore, specific structures making up the nephron include the Bowman's capsule, the proximal convoluted tubule, the loop of Henle, and the distal convoluted tubule. The kidneys are attached to the ureters, and the ureters come as a pair with one ureter attached to each kidney. Now, these ureters are tube-shaped, and they are largely made up of smooth muscle fiber. They are lined by transitional epithelium and tend to be about 25 centimeters to approximately 30 centimeters long and have a diameter in the range of about 3 to 4 millimeters. The ureters propel urine from the kidneys to the bladder through the process of peristalsis. Peristalsis is a series of wave-like contractions from smooth muscles which cause the urine to be propelled. As an interesting question, please think about where else in the body peristalsis occurs and what bodily functions it may facilitate. The bladder is roughly spherical shaped and is an organ that is hollow and muscular. Now, the bladder sits in the pelvic cavity and is located to the anterior of the rectum and is superior to the reproductive organs. Now, in a typical human, the bladder can hold up to about half a liter or so before the desire to urinate occurs. However, the bladder can store significantly more urine. The bladder also contains transitional epithelium, which moves from a more stratified to simple configuration as the bladder fills and it expands. Now, it is important to note, too, that the bladder tends to be smaller in women due to the uterus taking up space. Now, the primary function of the bladder is definitely the fact that it delays and controls urination. Without the bladder, whenever the kidneys would produce urine, we would just constantly be having small amounts of urine coming out of us. Whereas with the bladder, we are able to store and hold this urine for some time until we decide to urinate. And this allows us to go from having just constant amounts of urination should we not have the bladder to having only several urinations per day. The urethra is the final stage of the urinary system and is connected to the bladder and goes to the outside of the body where urine will eventually go and end up. Now, the urethra is held closed by the urethral sphincter and tends to be extremely different across genders. with men having a urethra that's typically in the range of 18 to 20 centimeters long, whereas in women it tends to be much shorter at about 4 centimeters. The reason for men having this long urethra is due to the fact that men have a phallus. Within that, there are three sections to the male urethra: the prostatic urethra, the membranous urethra, and the spongy urethra. And the male urethra passes through both the prostate and seminal ducts, whereas for the woman, their urethra is situated behind the labia. The functionality of the urethra is pretty straightforward, as its purpose is to move urine from the bladder to outside of the body. It's also important to note that in men, seminal fluid will also travel out of the urethra when it exits the body. So let's recap and summarize everything we've talked about today so far in this presentation, and just do a quick wrap up on everything we've learned about the urinary system from urine formation to elimination. Blood is filtered through the kidneys, which produce or extract waste such as urine, and this is individually processed by the structural unit of the nephron. The ureters move urine from the kidneys to the bladders and do so through the process of peristalsis, which is the wave-like movements of the smooth muscles. Once in the bladder becomes the holding tank and stores urine until the body decides to get rid of it, and that is done so when the urine moves through the urethra. Now, before we close out this presentation, let's talk about some potential issues that can happen within the urinary system. These aren't necessarily common issues, but they're definitely painful and can be extremely debilitating to a person. So the first of these that we should talk about is kidney stones, and these are hard deposits of salts and minerals that form within the kidneys. There are many different causes for these. However, it can affect any part of your urinary tract, all the way from your kidneys to your bladder. And often the stones form when the urine becomes concentrated, where the minerals tend to stick together and form into crystalline shapes. Now, these are extremely painful. However, they don't tend to cause any permanent damage, so long as they're recognized and taken care of in a timely manner. Stricture is also a very nasty thing to have happen. This could occur in, say, your ureters or your urethra, in which the tubes close and it doesn't allow liquid or less liquid to go through. This can cause severe problems to your urinary system and also be extraordinarily painful. Urinary tract infections are perhaps a more common issue and result in the inflammation of the urinary tract. This can be treated using antibiotics, but is not a very comfortable thing to have happen to you. And perhaps the most severe of all of these issues we're discussing today would be kidney failure. This could possibly result in you needing to have a kidney transplant or go on dialysis to compensate for the failed kidneys, which are unable to properly process waste out of the blood. The final question I would like to pose on the topic of the urinary system is, what happens when you have a kidney transplant? And think about people who have had kidney transplants and how that's affected them. For example, the celebrity Selena Gomez has had kidney issues in a transplant. If you would like to learn more on the topic of the urinary system, please see the following sources which I used. There is a lot of information on these websites, and they're definitely great learning resources. Thank you very much for taking the time today to listen to my presentation and explanation of the urinary system. I hope you learned a thing or two, and that you think on those two questions that I posed earlier.